Deciding not to fight for his wife's life, the husband called a notary and a priest to her room. But he had no idea what the orderly would do. "So, what are we going to do about Megan? We can't delay, she might wake up. Oswald, hurry up, or the goods might slip away from under our noses. I'm not going back to that tiny apartment. Mom, what do you suggest?" "We need to call a priest and a notary. The priest will absolve her sins and later perform the last rites, while the notary will help draft the will. Now is the perfect time since she's not aware of anything. What will the staff think?" "They have nothing to think about. These fools live on their meager wages, and I certainly won't. I didn't bend over backward for Megan just to end up empty-handed." "Did you really? I didn't notice. Don't talk back to your mother, Oswald." "Mom, I'm on your side, and I don't want to go back to our horrible neighborhood either. So we'll do as you suggest." The elderly woman, with an air of sophistication, gazed with a predatory look. Her companion, who looked just like her but about 30 years younger, bore an uncanny resemblance. The same brown eyes, staring with arrogance and disdain. The elderly woman's weak chin, seemingly merging with her neck and covered with wrinkles, had already started to sag, while the younger man's chin still retained its shape. However, it was clear that in a few more years, Oswald would be his mother's twin. Surprisingly, they were even the same height. They were standing, and William noticed that even their shortest nurse, April, was taller than them, though she wasn't that tall herself. William didn't know why he instantly thought of them as vicious pygmies, but decided to listen to their sinister whispers, and he didn't regret it. The tall, well-built, fair-haired young man wasn't even surprised when the two dwarfs went to see his favorite patient. That's exactly how he imagined the kind of people who'd visit a seriously ill young woman for the first time. The nurses simply called her the rich lady. William thought that was inhuman. She was a person with her own story and a beautiful woman at that. Life hadn't been kind to her, neither with her health nor with her family. Why emphasize that Megan, who was slowly becoming a shadow, was once a popular businesswoman? She was heavily involved in charity work and built a brilliant company that surpassed all competitors in the city in just a few years. William wished he knew more about her. He didn't want her to die. Megan was like a beautiful, fading flower. In the hospital, they laughed at the orderly who tenderly cared for the wealthy patient. "Look, it seems like William has found himself a bride. Too bad her fiancé is death." The joke was cruel. The orderly didn't intend to compete in foolishness with these envious people. They were so irritated by someone else's wealth that they were ready to mock a person barely fighting for their life. He did everything he could for his patient, but she had little chance of survival. Megan was either in a medicated coma or taking medication. The saddest part was that it seemed she didn't want to fight for her life. Now that William had seen her closest relatives, he understood why. When everyone around you wants to bury you quickly and take your money, it's hardly the best motivation to keep living. William understood Megan well. His own wife wanted nothing to do with him after he had failed. Fortunately, he managed to pull himself together and now worked as an orderly. When he was falsely accused and made to answer for someone else's mistakes, he didn't just stop being a doctor, he became a shadow of who he once was. Envy, judgment, gossip, all came to the surface. He was thrown out with scandal and disgrace, accused of something he had nothing to do with. Megan, too, had failed in life, choosing a partner who was just waiting for her to be gone. Isn't that a true horror? What's the point of all the money in the world if behind you aren't allies, but people ready to stab you in the back as soon as you weaken? Megan, listen, we're both lucky in a way. You have to survive, if only to prove to Oswald and his dear mother that they couldn't break you. Think about it, won't it be priceless to see their faces when you recover and enjoy your own money again? You're young, beautiful, and you still have so much ahead of you. You'll see. William spoke to the patient when no one was watching. It was unlikely that she could understand anything. But he believed that words were not just carriers of meaning, they also conveyed the energy of love and support. That's why he decided to tell her that he had seen Oswald today, overheard his conversation with Megan's mother-in-law, and now understood her even better. "Thank you," said the patient, who, in his opinion, should have been unconscious. She suddenly opened her eyes, tears shining in them. She tried to lift her weakened hand, but immediately let it fall back, as it was still too heavy. "Megan, do you understand me?" William wasn't sure, but he decided to share his secret anyway. "You see, no one here knows, but I used to be a very, very good doctor. I can actually help you. I'll take care of you, but I can't do it alone. You have to fight too." The patient suddenly managed to raise her hand and gently, almost imperceptibly, touched his cheek. The man lowered his eyes to the edge of her bed and began to weep silently. He whispered that if she survived, he would believe again that life had meaning. And he didn't want anything from her, he just wanted her to fight. Then they would win, no doubt. William didn't even notice when he fell asleep for about 10 minutes. A nurse tapped him on the shoulder. "Hey, go clean the ward, your fiancé is still sleeping anyway." The elderly woman sighed. She didn't understand this strange orderly who had appeared out of nowhere. There wasn't a single job record in his employment history, and William was well over 30. He was odd. "Yeah, I'm on my way." Just nodded off, William rubbed his eyes, still red from tears. "You should get some sleep, or you won't last long," the elderly nurse said. "Yeah, I know, April. It's just that there's a lot of work and not enough money." "How can I get enough sleep?" he shrugged. "Being an orderly isn't the best job. Can't you do anything else? What did you do before? Do you even have a family?" No one from the medical staff knew anything about the newcomer. Naturally, they wanted to get at least some information. It was strange to work side by side with someone about whom you knew nothing. It wasn't right. If William had something to hide, well, everyone has secrets, but he could at least share something about himself, so he'd stop seeming like the perfect worker, who's always efficient and never complains. Was he even human? Or maybe he was some kind of cyborg. It was all very strange. What if he was a bad person pretending to be good? "I can do a lot of things, April. But nothing came in handy. I make do with what I have," William answered evasively, completely ignoring the question about his family. "If you don't want to talk, just say so," grumbled the elderly nurse, frowning. But even this tactic didn't have the desired effect. William didn't justify himself. He simply pretended not to have heard the remark and went back to work. The medical staff didn't like the orderly much, not just because of his secrecy. William set the bar too high. His example showed how much a young, healthy man without bad habits, who genuinely cared about patients, could accomplish. He didn't cut corners, didn't get into conflicts with colleagues, and no matter how much they tried to provoke him, he didn't react. If he was given work that wasn't his responsibility, he'd just do it. It was easier than arguing and faster too. If someone criticized him for no reason, he would fix it without even shooting a resentful look. He never resorted to any tricks and would even smile with that strange, condescending smile of his. The management had started to use William as an example for others, and no one liked it. "If you want to be Mr. Perfect, be my guest, but go somewhere where there are more like you and let others have the right to grumble, slack off, be rude, skip shifts, and take bribes." April Arthurs shared her opinion with another nurse, who replied, "You know what I'll tell you, April, that orderly isn't as simple as he seems. Have you noticed he pays special attention to the richest patient? So if she gets better, he'll get a big payday, or he might even steal her from her husband," said Adriana Backer. "Oh, Adriana, are you saying he's a gigolo?" The woman was delighted. It would be fantastic if the perfect William turned out to have a serious flaw, something to tarnish his reputation. Very well could be. Don't let your guard down, and don't fall for his act. Everyone has their motives. No one gives away kindness for free. But if it's something that stinks, well, that's a different story. William is clever, very clever," Adriana said with confidence. And the two ladies, having poured baseless contempt on a man they knew nothing about, later sipped their coffee in triumphant silence, exchanging significant glances. They were both very satisfied, convinced that they had unmasked this orderly, who only appeared to be good and kind. A gigolo, a hunter after someone else's inheritance. There could be no other explanation. Listen, Adriana, I was just thinking, how will that rich woman recover? After all, she's being treated by the hospital director's son. And you know how unskilled he is, and he didn't get much of a brain at birth either, April said after some time, as the coffee, now mixed with a stronger and more magical ingredient, began to flow through her veins. Her face turned so red that one might assume there was very little coffee in the cup, and mostly the stronger drink. Well, you can't argue with that. Robert is quite the troublemaker. No one has ever left his care alive if they were even a little sick, Adriana mused. Legends were already being told about the hospital director's son. The father tried every possible and impossible way to promote him, but the son was untrainable. As clumsy as he remained. But his ambitions and sense of self-importance were overflowing. It was dangerous to let him near patients at all, and the entire medical staff knew it. But how do you oppose the director? Well, then there's only one option left. William will convince Megan to rewrite her inheritance to him. Adriana raised her index finger confidently, indicating that this wasn't just a conclusion, but an axiom. Wait, but the rich woman has a husband. I've only seen them once, but they're such awful people. The son praises his mother, and she dreams of grabbing her daughter-in-law's wealth, whom she can't stand, April observed, showcasing her keen eye for detail. Well, how should I know? Maybe William will make the rich woman divorce, or he'll ask for her card and withdraw a huge sum. There are plenty of ways for these con artists to do it. Adriana didn't like that April was arguing with her, questioning her ideas. What's next? Saying that the orderly is an honorable man. Yeah, right, Adriana would never believe that. She'd seen these do-gooders before, they only smiled because they live off others. It's all an act. Someone who works from dawn to dusk and lives off their hard-earned income isn't cheerful and nice. They wouldn't treat patients like precious treasures. A normal healthcare worker is grumpy, dissatisfied, and tries to get rid of everyone as quickly as possible unless they've been well paid off. Fine, I'll try to find out more about him. It's interesting, April Arthurs had her own interest in the matter. Her niece, Magdalene, worked as a doctor in the same hospital and had taken a liking to the handsome orderly. She'd asked her aunt to figure out why he wasn't chasing after skirts like a normal man. Even if William was planning to grab the rich woman's money, it didn't mean he couldn't later start a family with the elderly nurse's niece. On the contrary, if he had a financial interest, that meant he was a normal person, a provider. He'd be good to build a family with. The next day, Oswald said to his mother, "You know, it wasn't hard at all to find a notary and a priest willing to visit a critically ill patient for a small fee. Mom, you're the smartest, most sensible woman I've ever known. What would I do without you?" His admiration was entirely genuine. Oswald had never considered that, at 35, he should be making independent decisions. He was perfectly content with his mother chewing everything up for him and spoon-feeding him. He didn't want any other life. You see, and you were worried they'd start asking questions? Never doubt your mother. People have been doing this since time immemorial, and that's why they're still around, his mother advised. Jennifer Gordon herself had never listened to her parents. She had given birth to a son by a married but wealthy man and had managed to take a piece for herself just in time to live comfortably. And when the money started to run out, Oswald had grown up just in time. He got lucky. Megan, whom he once went to school with, took an interest in him. But he would have just let the opportunity pass if his mother hadn't pointed out this unique chance. With the arrival of a rich yet trusting daughter-in-law, Jennifer's life reached a whole new level. If earlier, a 3-room old apartment and a modest income seemed like the limit of her dreams, now fate had given her a more interesting opportunity to profit. And if they became the heirs, they could move to any country and live in luxury. It was Megan who dreamed of paying her employees fair wages and providing them with housing after 5 years of work so they wouldn't have to take out loans. Now, these fantasies about creating a paradise on earth and treating the poor and destitute humanely were about to die along with the foolish daughter-in-law who wasted money on people and had no idea how to manage it. Jennifer Gordon planned to sell her daughter-in-law's business empire to competitors who would take a completely different approach to those pampered employees, paying them a pittance once more. And if someone wasn't satisfied, the door would be shown to them. Dreams that would make Jennifer Gordon even a little poorer were not meant to come true. She didn't care about the well-being of others. The most important thing was that she lived comfortably for the rest of her days. Well, actually, Mom, both of them did ask why I was in such a hurry since Megan isn't exactly on her deathbed but just in critical condition. Her son interrupted Jennifer Gordon's dreams of a luxurious life, and she frowned in displeasure. It turned out that there was still an obstacle between her and the life of her dreams. Megan was stubbornly refusing to die. And what did my clever boy say to them? Jennifer tried not to argue with her son at this moment. At another time, she would have been harsher, but right now, Oswald could get upset over nothing and throw a tantrum, so it was best to praise him as much as possible. I explained that my wife's condition is such that anything could happen at any moment. I even lied that it was her last wish, Oswald replied with a satisfied look. That's right. Megan won't be able to say that she didn't ask anyone to come. She's barely aware of anything now, Jennifer rejoiced. When the priest and notary arrived at the hospital, the medical staff initially thought they were there for an elderly patient who was on the brink of death. When they headed towards Megan, they just shrugged. After all, if the hospital director's son is going to operate on you, maybe it's wise to invite such a grim pair. Your wife doesn't look that bad. Is it really necessary to rush like this? You know, she might get upset, and that could worsen her condition. The priest took Oswald out into the corridor to share his thoughts. The notary, however, didn't object. He was also surprised that the husband was so eager to bury his wife, but in his practice, it wasn't uncommon when the spouse was wealthy. He'd been paid, and he just wanted to do his job as quickly as possible, preferably without any problems. Well, as I mentioned, Megan's diagnosis means that anything can happen at any moment. And she's about to undergo surgery. I can't go against my wife's wishes, Oswald said. You're such a liar, aren't you? Megan didn't ask for anything like this. It's just you and your mother scheming, thought William, who feared that the priest might be right and that Megan's condition would indeed worsen because of this visit. Then again, if the surgery was going to be performed by the director's son, the patient had little chance of surviving it. It was hard to find a worse surgeon. Robert was not only incompetent, but also very arrogant and felt no guilt if something went wrong. Daddy would rush in and fix everything. That's how it always was. William felt deeply hurt. He, a brilliant surgeon from a big city, had spent time in prison, lost his license because of a similar daddy's boy. He'd been made to take the blame for someone else's mistake. Now he worked as an orderly in a small-town hospital. And overconfident types like Robert continued to harm people. But where was the justice? Maybe this whole situation with Megan happened just so I could save her from this so-called surgeon. I could do the surgery, and she'd survive. Yes, but how do I make it happen? I'm still without a license. And even if I admitted I could perform the surgery, no one would let me near her, William thought. The arrival of the notary and the priest pushed him toward decisive action. He realized he had nothing left to lose and simply had to find a way to do the surgery. And once he saved Megan, whatever happened would happen. If he had to go to jail again, at least this time it would be for a good cause. At least he'd know he'd saved a life. For now, William didn't know how he was going to do it, but he was confident he'd find a way. His spirits lifted, and he felt a glimmer of hope. After all, on the day of the surgery, the only surgeon available would be the director's son. The senior surgeon was on vacation, and his deputy was on sick leave, so things weren't looking too bad. It was unlikely they'd postpone the surgery again, they'd already done that once. and waiting any longer would be dangerous for the patient's health. The irony, however, was that letting Robert operate was even more dangerous than not operating at all. Perhaps this really was his chance to do something good for the woman his heart had somehow become attached to. A will? Am I dying? Megan couldn't hold back her tears when her husband, with a tragic expression, nodded in response to her questions behind the priest's back. So when the priest started talking about how everything was in God's hands, Megan thought he was just trying to comfort her. Oswald decided that his mother would be proud of him. He'd arranged everything so cleverly. "So, do you have any other close relatives besides Oswald?" asked the notary. No, Megan began to cry. She remembered growing up with a cruel aunt who had adopted her only to get her apartment and savings after her mother's death. The aunt had tricked the naive girl, who believed she was loved, into giving everything up and then threw her out with nothing. Megan managed to survive that. She built everything from scratch, worked hard, but eventually her strength ran out, and now she felt useless. What was the point of soaring so high if she'd just crash in the end? Maybe it would have been better if she'd died with her mother during that boat trip when the vessel capsized. But no, it didn't happen. Someone had saved her at the cost of their own life, as she later found out. Her mother, however, disappeared into the water. Her body was only found a month later, carried away by the current. When she rose in the business world, she found that there was no one left to talk to. Her aunt craved money like a hungry wolf, but Megan chose not to engage with her. The woman had already taken her share. Enough. You'll never succeed anyway. You'll die just like my sister. I always hated her. She was just like you, an arrogant snob. She always talked to me like I wasn't even worthy of being in her shadow, were the last words from the woman who had pretended to be a kind stepmother until she tricked Megan out of her money. "Marilyn, I pity you. You've gone mad with envy," was all Megan said to her. Her aunt had never been able to have children of her own. She went through several husbands, but it brought her no happiness. The truth was, the aunt simply didn't know how to love, not even herself. She was never born with that ability. Maybe that's why she hated Megan's mother so much, who was always overflowing with love. And what happened after that? One day, Megan was invited to a class reunion, where she met Oswald. Back when they were in school together, he was the only one who had shown her even a little care. He carried her backpack, shared his lunch, and stood up for her. He was a genuinely kind boy. Megan was even surprised that he could be the son of his mother, who had always been cruel. "Oswald, hi, how have you been?" she asked him that day. "I've been okay, nice to see you," he replied. What touched her was that he didn't try to flatter her or ask for anything, unlike everyone else she knew. No, Megan wasn't in love with him, but a kind word is always appreciated. They started spending time together, going for walks, visiting cafes, and just talking, and eventually, it developed into a romance. "Megan, are you out of your mind? Why would you want that plain little man? You're tall and beautiful, with those big green eyes and long black hair down to your waist. You can find someone much better," her friends told her. But to her, Oswald seemed so nice, homely, and she was sure he'd be a great father. So, when she became pregnant, she married him, even though she didn't love him. The baby didn't want to stay with them. She lost him almost right after the wedding, but she didn't go through with a divorce. Oswald clung to her, saying they'd have other children, and she thought he wanted to build a family with her, that he loved her. Later, Megan realized he never wanted children, he just needed a way to stay close to her, and the child was merely an excuse. When she figured this out, she decided to leave him, but her illness got in the way. Now, it didn't matter where her money would end up. If she didn't write a will in Oswald's favor, it would go to her aunt. Neither option was any better. That's what she explained to the priest, who had asked her to share what was troubling her after she signed the will and the notary left. "It's good that you don't hold grudges against those who didn't love you. But what would you do differently if you had the chance to stay?" the priest asked for some reason. "But that's not true. I'm going to die. Megan didn't want to be comforted. You see, you've already said several times that you don't value your life. You weren't grateful for the fact that you were saved when your mother died. You didn't appreciate that you managed to start a new life. And now you've already decided everything for yourself again. That's ingratitude. Pride. Have you ever thought about that? The priest looked at her kindly. Aren't you just supposed to forgive my sins? Megan suddenly felt anger toward this kind, elderly priest. God doesn't owe anyone anything. He won't lose anything if we don't turn to him, but we will. Are you angry? The priest asked. And suddenly, Megan told him everything she'd been hiding from herself. Her mother had taken her to church every week, saying that God would protect them from everything, but it hadn't worked, and so she stopped going and praying. She'd resigned herself to the fact that there was no justice in the world. It's good that you told me this, the priest gently patted her head. You have something to think about. The poison must come out of your soul. That's the point, to be freed from it. Come to me when you get better, he said for some reason. Stop comforting me. I'm going to die, that's all. There won't be anything else. And I won't be coming to you. Megan found the strength to be indignant. Even she was surprised. I've already written my will. Everything I've done will turn to dust. It will all go to Oswald. That's if you die. But maybe you'll decide to live after all. The priest wasn't the least bit annoyed by her outburst and continued to look at her as if she were a stubborn child. I'm not deciding anything, she repeated stubbornly and broke into tears. Go ahead and cry, it's good for you. Don't keep it all bottled up. It's good that you shared everything today. And please do come by. I'll be waiting for you. The priest stood up and left. But his question kept spinning around in Megan's mind. Really? What would she do differently if she stayed? She didn't know the answer herself. She had always tried to fill the emptiness in her life with business, money, marriage, and even tried to have a child, but everything somehow fell apart. And why didn't that stubborn priest just offer a ready-made answer? Was she really a bad person? No, she had done everything right, cared for people, didn't repay evil with evil, and never took what wasn't hers. But none of her good deeds seemed to count. In the end, she had been punished anyway. That's how it seemed. She wanted to feel resentful, but somehow, she truly started to believe that maybe she could recover and go to that priest, to let him tell her what she had done wrong and what she needed to change so that nothing would ever hurt in her soul again. It would be nice to survive after all. Oh, how Oswald and his mother's faces would stretch, and her aunt would be upset too. She sat up in bed and quietly laughed. William, who had just entered her room, was very surprised. For the first time, the patient showed emotion and even joyful ones. Did the lawyer and the priest cheer you up? You're brave, he joked. He didn't know what else to say in his happiness. For the first time, she looked like a living person and not a ghost. Maybe something helped. I thought priests only came before death, but the father said that you should also take communion before good changes, Megan replied. Well, I believe you'll survive too. I'm on your side, William spoke to her for the first time. Usually, Megan was under the influence of medication, but today they hadn't given her any, so she could meet with the notary while in a sound state of mind. Thank you for your kindness. You know, I actually heard everything you said. Sometimes I even thought it was some kind of guardian angel talking to me. And now I see you're a real person. Megan winced from pain. Has the painkiller worn off? Let me sit up in 4, William offered. Well, I guess I had to end up in a hospital to have a handsome man take care of me with such care. Don't take my jokes personally, I don't know what's gotten into me today. Megan thought to herself that she had somehow changed her mind about dying. Was that even possible? And with that thought, she drifted off to sleep, not noticing how William blushed at her words. He looked so happy, as if none of the tragic events in his life had ever happened. It seemed this woman was capable of working miracles on his soul. He might have argued about who was really the angel and who was the beautiful one here. A couple of days later, on the eve of the surgery, it suddenly dawned on William how he could get rid of Robert. He began executing his plan that very day. "Good afternoon, Robert Benson," he greeted the plump young man with the round face and perpetually disdainful expression. "What do you want?" the incompetent surgeon asked. "Well, there are rumors going around that it's no coincidence that one surgeon went on sick leave and another took a vacation. That's what I wanted to talk about. Orderlies don't get paid much." William knew that Robert believed money solved all problems. So, to make it seem believable, he hinted that he was motivated by money. "All right, let's meet during lunch break at the cafe around the corner. Walls have ears, you know." "My treat," Robert Benson said graciously, intrigued by the information. The orderly seemed like a serious person. "Worth listening to." Then he added, "Just keep in mind, I have surgery after lunch. So don't be late." "I'll be there on time," William promised. Of course, he would be there. He needed to slip some sleeping pills into Robert's drink to knock him out for at least half a day, so he wouldn't interfere. William knew that Robert often drank during lunch. The surgeon didn't think it affected his surgeries in any way. "So, what did you want to say?" "Get straight to the point," Robert asked when he arrived at the meeting. He immediately ordered himself a strong drink, and the bartender didn't look surprised. "You want a drink?" Robert offered him one too. "No, I'm on the wagon," William lied. He had never been a heavy drinker. But if he'd said drinking was forbidden at work, it would have angered Robert and turned him against him, and that wasn't part of his plan. "Too bad for you. I can drink or not drink," Robert bragged. Robert clearly overestimated his willpower. Everyone whispered that not a day went by without him getting drunk. But Robert didn't comment on it either. "You see, someone wants to set you up," William informed him that Megan was beyond saving, and that's supposedly why the other surgeons had disappeared just in time. "Well, it's no secret that people are jealous of me, but that's not very interesting. My dad will always bail me out, no question about it," Robert smiled. Well, the plan didn't work. There was no convincing him to conveniently go on sick leave. William would have to resort to the sleeping pills. When Robert turned away to order another drink, William took out a container of ice and added it to the brown liquid that was left in the glass. He knew Robert always added ice, and in his current state, he was unlikely to notice that it hadn't melted for some reason. "All right, buddy, one last drink, and then I need to get ready for surgery. Can't keep people waiting." "Sorry, I couldn't be of more help with your information," Robert said, downing his glass. 5 minutes later, he was completely knocked out. It would have been cruel to leave him at the bar for half a day, but fortunately, his phone rang and the screen displayed the word wife. William answered. "Who is this?" "Where's my husband?" asked an anxious woman. William already knew that Robert's wife often called him, trying to keep him from overindulging. But he always lied to her and would sneak into the bar. Sometimes even in the morning. It seemed she'd called his work phone, figured out where he'd gone, and was now trying to catch him. "Sorry, but your husband needs to be picked up. This is the orderly. I just happened to be nearby, and it looks like Robert's had a bit too much." William pretended to want to help cover for his colleague. "I'm on my way. I live nearby." "He's at his usual spot," she correctly named the bar. "Yes, I'll be waiting. I'll help you get him into the car." William kept his promise. And now he was seemingly not to blame for anything at all. Robert just got drunk, and William had spoken to his wife. That's all. "Thank you," Robert's wife said when he helped her get him to the door, handing him some money. "No, that's not necessary. Just make sure your husband doesn't show up at work today. I'll say he wasn't feeling well and had to leave. If he turns up, it'll be awkward," William advised, covering his tracks. If Robert woke up, his wife definitely wouldn't let him go. William could be sure of that. When William returned to the hospital, the most dangerous part of his plan still lay ahead. Someone had already reported that the surgeon's wife had picked him up from the bar in an unfit state. The medical staff buzzed like a beehive. No one knew what to do. They couldn't postpone the surgery, and they couldn't risk Marcus Benson's son's reputation. There is actually a solution. To his colleague's surprise, William pulled out his diploma, along with all the documents proving that he had once been qualified. But it's dangerous. You weren't imprisoned for nothing, the doctors murmured. I knew he was hiding something, the elderly nurse said. He can't be trusted, Adriana agreed. Wait, hold your horses. I've heard about this situation. It's not as straightforward as it seems. One of the doctors had managed to make a call to a contact in another city and found out that William had likely been wrongfully accused. But even if we assume he wasn't at fault, he still lost all his skills by now, the doctors buzzed. Colleagues, listen up. I'm in charge here for now. First, there are no other surgeons. Second, let's be honest, since no one else is listening, it's unlikely anyone could perform the surgery worse than Robert. In fact, the patient might be lucky that he got drunk. The head of the department, Anthony Brooks, wasn't exactly fond of William, but he understood that if the patient died, there'd definitely be a scandal, bringing trouble for everyone. And so, bypassing all protocols, William took on the surgery at his own risk. His heart was pounding wildly. If he failed, he'd never forgive himself. When the surgery ended successfully, everyone breathed a sigh of relief. Well, now we just need to get Robert Benson to say that he performed the surgery himself, the head of the department concluded. Robert arrived only the next day and immediately lashed out at William. Oh, so you spiked my drink? I've never passed out that quickly before. And you ratted me out to my wife too. She threw such a fit, you wouldn't believe it. So, you decided to make a comeback in the profession? It's not happening. I've already told my father everything, Robert said, glaring at William. William didn't even have a chance to respond before he was summoned to Marcus Benson's office. Nothing good could come of this. Still, William's heart was beating joyfully. His hands hadn't trembled, he'd performed a brilliant surgery, and Megan would live. The bald, towering man immediately began shouting at him. What do you think you're doing, you criminal? How dare you? I'll destroy you. Marcus Benson, there was no other choice, William replied, certain that he'd be fired and disgraced regardless, so he didn't even try to defend himself. Here's the deal. You have one chance. You'll say that my son performed the surgery. Otherwise, you're going straight back to prison, the director hissed. It seemed that the department head had spoken with him and suggested this idea. William knew that Marcus Benson had always dreamed of his son gaining a stellar reputation in the medical world. He refused to accept that he'd forced Robert into a profession that didn't suit him. In their family, the men had always been surgeons, so his son had no choice. Yes, of course. Thank you for being so understanding. William concealed his resentment about having his achievements so brazenly stolen. But in the end, things had worked out quite well, and prison had been a real threat, as he wasn't legally allowed to practice medicine for several years after his release, and that probation period still wasn't over. That same day, the hospital staff received a notice about the official version of events. Robert Benson had brilliantly handled the surgery and saved a hopeless patient, even though it had seemed impossible. So, when can we collect the body? Oswald received a call from a nurse who said that everything had finally worked out. Adriana meant that the surgery had been a success, but Oswald and his mother confused her with the nurse they'd bribed, the one who was supposed to keep them informed about Megan's condition. That's how the mix-up occurred. Everything's ready for the funeral, said his mother, who was also dressed in black. Oh no, Megan's perfectly fine, the elderly nurse clarified, realizing they had misunderstood and wanting to cheer them up. What do you mean? Is she still alive? Jennifer Gordon asked indignantly, glaring at her son, who had given her false information. Of course. What else could good news mean? Certainly not death, the nurse replied, puzzled. "Oh, yes, of course, we're very happy," Oswald said, but his words completely contradicted the expression on his face. He looked as though he was about to cry. Everything had fallen apart, and he felt that he'd let his mother down. She was genuinely upset. So much so that she didn't even bother to check on her daughter-in-law in the hospital room. When Oswald escorted her to the car, he said, "Mom, calm down. There's another way to get the money. We can have Megan declared incompetent. By the time she recovers, we'll have everything done right under her nose." Oswald had recently watched a movie where the cunning main character did just that, and it worked. "You're my clever boy." His mother even stopped sniffling and agreed that a fake medical certificate could be easily arranged. Rumor had it that Marcus Benson was very much for sale, although only for a hefty sum. It wasn't worth approaching him with anything less. "See, you've raised a worthy son. I'll take over the business. Of course, I'll need to convince the shareholders that I'm fit for the role of director," Oswald said proudly. His mother's mood improved again. That meant he was doing everything right. "Everyone knows that you only have one mother, but you can have as many wives as you like." Megan was just expendable. Besides, it humiliated him that everyone knew Oswald only as her husband. Now, he would be the one in the spotlight. The very next day, using their connections, Jennifer Gordon and Oswald arranged a meeting with the hospital director and offered him a substantial sum, which they wrote on a napkin. William didn't find out the exact amount, but he realized that the director had promised to take care of everything. He decided to tell Megan right away, before these vultures wrapped their tentacles around her again. "Oh, William, I'm so glad to see you. You know, Robert Benson saved me. He's so modest. I barely convinced him to accept money for the hospital. If it weren't for his father, it would never have happened. Marcus Benson is truly wonderful, such a wise leader. No wonder he raised such a brilliant son," Megan said. William felt pain hearing this woman, for whom he had risked everything, now singing praises to those who had almost killed her. "Listen, Megan, tell me, do you trust me?" he asked, looking into her green eyes. She noted with surprise that the orderly seemed very troubled. "Of course, what happened? Do I have complications?" Megan asked. "Yes, but not with your health." William laid out the whole story from start to finish. She listened carefully without interrupting. They spent about 10 minutes in complete silence. Then suddenly, Megan became calm and composed, like a coiled spring. "Do you have a laptop? I need to conduct a meeting via video call, but my husband and mother-in-law took my phone," she asked. "Of course, we'll find one," William sighed with relief. She believed him, which meant everything would be all right. The next day, when Oswald came to meet with the shareholders and announced that he needed to replace his wife, he was shocked when a security guard promptly threw him out. "You're a fraud. Megan contacted us. Don't bother us again," was all he heard. A week passed, and news of the miraculous recovery of the businesswoman and the city's main philanthropist spread quickly. "How are you feeling? Do you realize that you had a 1 in 1,000 chance? There are only 1 or 2 cases in the country where someone has survived in such a situation," asked an eager journalist. "I'm doing great. Yes, I realize it was a miracle. I wanted to live, and it seems fate approved of my plan. But if it weren't for the skilled hands of this man, none of it would have been possible," she pointed to William, who was passing by in the corridor. "Wait, isn't he an orderly? Are you saying that good care is more important than the surgery?" the journalist asked, surprised. "William? No, he's not an orderly. He's a surgeon. It's just that there was an injustice," Megan explained, and she went on to tell the full, truthful story of how she was saved. This was her way of thanking the courageous man who had done the impossible for her, risking his career and freedom. As a result of the interview, everyone learned that Marcus Benson sold fake certificates of incompetency and that his son couldn't perform surgeries. All those responsible were dismissed. and a medical commission began considering reinstating William's right to practice medicine ahead of schedule. Before William could even grasp what was happening, his license was restored. He decided to stay and work at this clinic. Meanwhile, Megan decided to proceed with a divorce, although she hesitated a bit. "Megan, it was my mother who influenced me. You have no idea how much I regret it. I've always dreamed of adopting a child and starting over. Yes, I acted terribly, I made a mistake, but everyone deserves forgiveness," Oswald pleaded, having agreed on this version with his mother, who had permitted him to feign remorse and put all the blame on her. The most important thing was to retain the money and status at any cost. Jennifer didn't care what her daughter-in-law thought of her, only the outcome mattered. "But you tried to betray me. How dare you even talk to me?" Megan said, shocked. She knew, as Kant once said, that only two things were infinite: the starry sky and human stupidity. And if her husband had been merely foolish, she would have forgiven him. "Listen, Megan, I knew you would survive. I just wanted to take over managing the business until you were out of the hospital. Then you would have come back, and everything would have been fine." Oswald even shed a crocodile tear. He was motivated by the thought that his mother would praise him if he regained his wife's favor. "But you have no experience," Megan hesitated. It seemed Oswald was just foolish. Maybe she shouldn't judge him so harshly after all. After all, he was repentant. And the fact that they brought in the priest and notary, well, his mother had convinced him that it was the right thing to do. He wasn't to blame. Megan was leaning toward this view. "Listen, they say you shouldn't change horses midstream. Your health is still fragile, but give me a chance. And if I let you down, you can always leave me." Oswald fell to his knees before Megan. In reality, he was bowing to her money. But Megan was too kind-hearted to suspect such a thing. So she promised to think about his proposal and softened a bit. She was recovering quickly, thanks to William's care. Yet she had to face the truth. It was unlikely that she would ever be able to have a child. Perhaps her husband's idea of adopting a child from an orphanage was really what she needed right now. The priest had asked her back when she thought she was dying how she would want to live if given a second chance. And Megan thought that helping a child find a family was a very good option. "Oswald, here's the thing. Thank you for the idea. I will adopt a child, but I'm going to divorce you." "Don't worry, I'll help you and let you keep the apartment," Megan promised nobly. "Megan, you're making a mistake. If you divorce me, it's unlikely you'll be able to adopt a child. They give children to married couples, not to single people. Please forgive me, give me a chance. Stupidity isn't a crime, and I promise I won't listen to my mother anymore." Oswald continued to press all the right buttons. In the end, Megan thought he was right and decided to try trusting him again, though she knew it would be a slow process. William watched with a heavy heart as Oswald began to bring Megan to the hospital, kissing her on the cheek while she laughed at something he was saying. But if Megan had chosen to continue her life with her husband, what could he do? He would keep his love a secret. The most important thing was that she would be all right. After all, this wasn't a fairy tale where the one who saves the princess marries her. In this version, he had saved Megan from the dragon, and she had chosen to tie her fate to him again. It happens. In the meantime, a couple more dragons wanted to ruin William's life. Marcus Benson and his son were out for revenge and decided to sick William's ex-wife on him, the very woman who had abandoned him when his career took a downturn. Brittany had no idea that her husband's life had turned around, and she was thrilled when she found out she could easily get her hands on some money. She had no desire to work, and her carefree lifestyle required regular investments in drinks and outfits. So he didn't become a bum? "I thought he'd be dead in a ditch by now." The short, curvy brunette with an impressive bust was inspired by the idea of returning to her ex and begging him for money. She put on a dress with the deepest neckline and was confident she could charm William instantly. It was this scene, of the prodigal wife returning, that Megan witnessed when she arrived for another appointment. "Darling, I'm so happy you're doing well." Brittany instantly pressed herself against the unsuspecting William. He wasn't at all prepared for this encounter, and she had already locked lips with him. He began to push her away, protesting, but Megan didn't see this, as she had already run out of the clinic. Well, I'm such a fool for letting my imagination run wild. This is a sign that I should return to my husband, Megan thought. At times, she had felt that the orderly liked her. If she gave both him and herself time, maybe something would have developed. But after seeing that scene and hearing the staff whispering that William's wife had returned to him, she decided to leave him alone. She tried to be happy for him, but it didn't feel sincere. And she wished she could be in his wife's place. But it wasn't meant to be. In less than a few months, Megan and Oswald adopted a boy from the orphanage, just as they had planned. Arthur was 6 years old, and they still had a whole year to prepare the clever boy for school. Oh no, we really have to deal with that brat? His parents were probably monsters. He'll grow up and kill us, Jennifer Gordon complained. But she had the sense not to say this in front of her daughter-in-law. Mom, by the time Arthur grows up, a lot will have happened. Maybe something will happen to Megan, and he'll go back to the orphanage. You yourself told me to hold on to this golden opportunity with my wife, and there's no other way. I had to play on her love for children, Oswald shrugged. All right, you're right. But bring that little monster around as rarely as possible, Jennifer Gordon requested. Anyway, Arthur didn't really want to visit the mean aunt who he disliked from the start. He didn't care much for his stepfather either. Megan's mom, don't be upset, but I agreed to leave the orphanage only for your sake. I believe in you, the boy confessed when they were alone. What are you talking about? Did Oswald or Grandma hurt you? She asked anxiously, pulling him into a hug. Well, if I tell you, you won't believe me. You'll just say I'm making it up, Arthur mumbled. No, I do believe you, Megan said, pulling him onto her lap and looking into his eyes. Amazingly, the boy's eyes weren't just the same color, green, but the exact same shade of grass green as hers. It was as if fate itself had destined Arthur to be her son. They want to poison you, I heard them, the boy said. Megan froze in horror and asked him not to tell anyone else about this for now, promising him that she would think about what to do. At the same time, Brittany was trying to make her ex-husband's life miserable. She regularly visited him at work, always showing up tipsy. What, not happy to see your wife? Turning your nose up at me? Found yourself a younger woman, huh? Look me in the eyes, you traitor, she yelled, as if she were being skinned alive. Brittany, listen, stop coming to my work, you're embarrassing me. Here, take this money and don't show up again. We're over, and I'm not coming back to you, William replied. Rumors quickly spread around the department that he was indeed cheating on his wife and wasn't even spending nights at home, just as Brittany had screamed. No one could believe that he truly hadn't been involved with her since the day she walked out on him. William didn't know that these rumors were very convenient for his enemies. And so, when Brittany was hit by a car, no one suspected that it wasn't just an accident. He personally operated on her and made sure she survived. I'm sorry, William, it's my own fault. I got drunk and went out for another drink. That's when I got hit. Brittany changed drastically after the surgery. The brazen, obnoxious woman was gone. Instead, a person emerged who was capable of recognizing her mistakes. Brittany knew she'd likely be left disabled, but she also understood that she could easily have ended up dead, and she wanted to live more than ever. Brittany, I forgave you a long time ago. Maybe I did something wrong too when we were together. You were young, and I didn't pay enough attention. I should have taken more responsibility for you, so please forgive me too. Brittany burst into tears. I've found a job at the church. I'll be helping out there. I'll become a different person. I won't bother you anymore. Thank you. Call me if you need anything. I'll be glad if everything works out. It will. I believe in that. William made sure she received all the necessary rehabilitation procedures. After that, they parted ways. Occasionally, she would ask him to transfer a small amount to her card, but mostly, she called once a month at most, just to let him know that she was doing okay. It seemed she had finally come to her senses. William had never wished her harm, so he was glad to see her progress. He gave her advice to minimize the consequences of her injuries and even paid for some medications. About a month later, Brittany called him and said, "William, I went to the police. It turns out it was Marcus Benson who hit me. The police saw it on the cameras. I thought you should know. He was also the one who convinced me to frame you back then. He really hates you, doesn't he?" "Probably. You know, Brittany, I think you've just helped me." Thanks to that call, William managed to keep his job. He was no longer suspected of staging the accident to get rid of his annoying ex-wife. Marcus Benson received a prison sentence and finally abandoned any plans to harm William. Robert's wife sent him to rehab for his addiction, so there was no longer any threat from that side. Around this time, Megan seemed to have wised up and began believing Arthur's warnings. She installed cameras in their apartment and confirmed that her son was telling the truth. Her husband was indeed putting something in her food. When she sent it to a lab, it turned out to be a medication, but in such a high dose that it would have gradually weakened her over 6 months and led to her death. Moreover, the camera captured a very interesting conversation between her husband and his mother. "Mom, just be patient a little longer. We've already done so much. Soon, Megan will be gone. And don't fight with her. Be nicer to the boy too, so there won't be any suspicions later. Well, your wife is taking too long to die. And that brat annoys me. He glares at me as if he knows something. He threw away the toys I gave him. And whenever I try to feed him, he refuses to eat," Jennifer Gordon complained. "Well, I guess he has good genes. Smart kid. Too bad it won't help him," Oswald chuckled nastily. "I'll send him back to the orphanage with just as much pleasure right after Megan's funeral," Jennifer Gordon confessed. Mother and son had been careless, as Megan successfully faked signs of poisoning. She pretended to be dizzy and acted like she had no appetite. She had warned Arthur that she was fine and didn't let him out of her sight for a moment. He followed her around like a little shadow. Even at work, people jokingly started calling him her assistant. The video evidence and lab results put an end to the story. Oswald was sent to prison. As for her mother-in-law, she was more cunning and pretended to have lost her mind. She ended up in an expensive psychiatric facility meant for con artists like her. However, shortly afterward, a mix-up occurred with her medical records. Unfortunately for Jennifer, another patient with the same last name and initials was in the facility. The crafty fox was genuinely surprised when they began to treat her seriously. The mistake was only discovered 6 months later when the genuinely insane patient was discharged, and her family realized that she hadn't improved at all. Sadly, the treatment in the psychiatric hospital took a toll on Oswald's mother's health, and she never fully recovered. She started experiencing hallucinations, so it was decided to leave her in a real psychiatric ward and continue her treatment properly. The doctors managed to cover up their mistake this way. Sometime later, William ran into Megan on the street. She was walking with a handsome little boy. "How are you?" he smiled. "We're doing all right." "And how's your wife?" Megan asked politely. "Well, Brittany and I separated back when I was suspended." William decided not to go into details in front of the child. "I see. I'm on my own now too," Megan sighed. "What do you mean?" "You've got me," the boy protested and started chattering away. "And Oswald wanted to poison you anyway, and I saved you. Why would you miss him? Aren't you happy with me?" "Oh, Arthur, you're my happiness," Megan said, lifting him into her arms. "Looks like we both have a lot to talk about. Maybe we could meet sometime?" William hesitated. "When, for example?" Megan smiled. "Well, how about today or whenever?" William's heart sang like a bird. He had just realized that the woman of his dreams was single. "All right, but it will be late. Arthur's nanny arrives after 7, Megan said. Perfect. I love evenings, William blurted out, then blushed and added, well, when you spend them with someone you like. That evening, they did meet. Then again and again. And finally, the day came when William stayed with Megan forever. And the boy said, now this dad is something else. He's a real man. Megan laughed and told her son that she completely agreed with him.